go. All right. So, I've been on this little track of reading all of Common Sense after work. Trying to get through it, trying to get in the head. I think I might do the Constitution next, or maybe the Federalist Papers. Trying to get in the head of why our systems are and why they were created that way after recent events. Try to get a better feel of everything, and I feel like it was a good time to go back and remember why things are made the way they are, and I'm doing that right now with Thomas Paine's Common Sense, the founding fathers' favorite fanfic writer. All right. But I think this is the fourth part. First part was just going on why and how governments form. The second part was this problem with monarchies. The third part was events going on in America at the time. And his advocation for breaking with England. But I guess we'll see what this of the present ability of America with some miscellaneous reflections. Let's see what this part is about. I have never met with a man either in England or America who hath not confessed his opinion that separation between the countries would take place one time or another, and there is no instance in which we have shown less judgment than in endeavoring to describe what we call the rightness or fitness of content for independence. Man, already starting off not talking good. Usually it doesn't happen until the end of things. As all men allow the measure and vary only in their opinion of time, let us, in order to remove mistake, take a general survey of things and endeavor, if possible, to find out the very time. But I need not go far. The inquiry ceases at once. For the time hath found us. The general concurrence, the glorious union of all things proves fact. So he's saying that the consensus of the time that, yeah, this English being, or America being this English colony, it's probably not going to last forever, but let's see what his arguments for were. But right now, 'tis not in the numbers, but in the unity of our great strength lies. Yet our present numbers are sufficient to repel the force of all the world. The continent hath at the time of the largest body of armed and disciplined men of any power under heaven, and it is just arrived at that pitch of strength in which no single colony is able to support itself, and where the whole, when united, is able to do anything. Our land force is more than sufficient, as is our naval affairs. We cannot be insensible that Britain would never suffer an American man of war to be built. While the Connecticut remained in her hands, wherefore we should be no forwarder 100 years hence that branch than we are now. But the truth is, we should be less so, because the timber of the country is every day diminishing, and that which we will remain at last will be far off or difficult to procure. So he's saying, we got the men, we have the timber to build ships. If we wait, it might be too late. All right. And when I kind of like go back and overthink, it's more to convince myself of his point than try to like micro explain to whoever might be watching. All right. We were the continent crowded with inhabitants. Her sufferings under the present circumstances would be intolerable. The more seaport towns we had, the more we should have both to defend and lose. Our present numbers are so happily proportioned to our wants that no man need be idle. The diminution of trade affords an army, and the necessities of an army create a new trade. Debts we have none, and whatever we may contract on this account will serve as a glorious memento of our virtue. Can we but leave prosperity with settled form of government, an independent constitution of its own, the perchance at any price will be cheap. But the expended millions for the sake of getting a few vile acts repealed, and the routing and present ministries only, is unworthy of the charge, and it is using prosperity with the utmost cruelty, because it is leaving them to great work to do, and debt upon their backs from which they derive no advantage. Such a thought's unworthy of a man of honor, and the true characteristics of a narrow heart and piddling politician. All right, so he's saying we have no real national debt, so but we're going to get some in because the war started at this point when he's writing at this point. So he's like, all right, we're gonna take a lot of debt. We're gonna pay a price for this. So we better make it worth it. We can't just get some concessions from Britain. It's not going to be worth the cost that we're going to pay here. Doing what we're doing. All right. The debt we may contract doth not derive our regard of the work, be but accomplished. No nation ought to be without a debt. A national debt is a national bond, and when it bears no interest, is it in no case a grievance. Britain is oppressed with debt of upwards of 140 million sterling, for which she pays upward of 4 million interest, and has a compensation for her debt. She has a large navy. America is without a debt and without a navy. Yet for the 20th part of the English national debt, we could have a navy as large again. The navy of England is not worth at this time more than 3 million and a half sterling. The first and second editions of this pamphlet were published without the following calculations, which are now given as proof that a bill of assets to the navy is not just one. The charge of building the ship at each rate and furnishing her with mast, yards, sails, and rigging together with a proportion of 8 months' boatswains and carpenters' sea stores as calculated by Mr. Burchett. So I don't know if I really need to get into this, but I am curious of £1,000,000 sterling, 1776. Versus today, or 100 pounds of 72 is about 20,000 today. So just out of curiosity, let's take 1,000,000 times boop boop. Not 20,000. It would be 200. Am I doing this right? And 5 times. So I guess the math wasn't that hard. I didn't need to calculate, but so about 200 times. Oh, price increase of 20. Oh no, I'm an idiot. Jesus. So yeah, that's a lot more. That's a lot of money. But actually, in comparison to like military budgets today, it's still not a lot, but yeah, I'm not going to get into that. I'm not getting into the math of this. So he's saying America can have a really good navy if we just spent like the payment of debt that British spends on just their debt. Okay. No country on the globe is as so happily situated or internationally capable of raising a fleet as America. Tar, timber, iron, and cordage are her natural produce. We need go abroad for nothing. Whereas the Dutch, who make a large profits from hiring out their ships of war to the Spaniards or the Portuguese, are obligated to import most of the material they use. We ought to view the building of a fleet as an article of commerce. It is being the natural manufactory of this country. 'Tis the best money we can lay out. A navy, when finished, is worth more than it cost, and is that nice point in national policy, in which commerce and protection are united. Let us build. If we want them not, we can sell, and by that means replace our paper currency with ready gold and silver. In point of manning a fleet, people in general run into great errors. It is not necessary that 1/4 part should be sailors. So he's really going into the minutia of things at this point. His earlier ones were all about like theory and political theory and stuff like that. And now he's like really going like, all right, if we're doing this, we need a navy. He's really getting into the details of things in this chapter. Terrible privateer Captain Death stood the hottest engagement of any ship last year. Of any ship last war, not year. Yet had not 20 sailors on board, though her complement of men was upward of 200. A few able and social sailors will be able to instruct a sufficient number of active lensmen in the common work of the ship. So he's saying, like, while we might have as many sailors as we need, we don't need that many. We can teach them. Wherefore, we never can be more capable of beginning on maritime matters than now, while our timber is standing, our fisheries blocked up, and our sailors and shipwrights are out of employ. Men of war of 70 and 80 guns were built 40 years ago in New England, and why not the same now? Shipbuilding in America is America's greatest pride, in which she will in time excel the whole world. The great something, there's a smudge in the copy of this book, of the East are mainly inland and consequently excluded from the possibility of reviling her. That's another cutoff. Africa is in a state of barbarism. Oh, his little 17th or 18th century racism coming through. And no lower in Europe hath either such the extent of, I'm going to guess, chest, or in such internal supply of materials, where nature hath given the one, she hath withheld the other. To America hath she been liberal to both. The vast empire of Russia is almost shut out from the sea, where her boundless forest, her tar and iron and cordage are only articles of commerce. So he's like, we're really lucky to be in this geographical point. We have the chance to build an amazing navy. In point of safety, ought we be without a fleet? We are not the little people now which we were 60 years ago. At that time we might have trusted our property in the streets, or the fields rather, and slept securely without locks or bolts on our doors. This is such hilarity to me, of these, like, back in my day, we could sleep without locking our door and our windows. It's so funny. That's so funny. The case is now altered, and our methods of defense ought to improve with our increase of property. A common pirate 12 months ago might have come up the Delaware and laid the city of Philadelphia under contribution for what sum he pleased, and the same might have happened to other places. Nay, Any daring fellow in a brig of 14 or 16 guns might have robbed the whole continent and carried off 500,000 of money. These are circumstances which demand our attention and point out the necessity of naval protection. This guy really wants a navy. Thomas Paine is all about the navy. Some perhaps will say that after we have made it up with Britain, she will protect us. Can they be so unwise as to mean that she will keep a navy in our harbors for that purpose? Common sense will tell us that the power which hath endeavored to subdue us is of all others the most improper to defend us. Conquest may be effected under the pretense of friendship and ourselves after a long and brave resistance, but at last cheated into slavery. And if her ships are not to be admitted into our harbors, I would ask, how is she going to protect us? A navy 300 or 400 miles off can be little use, and on sudden emergencies, none at all. Wherefore, if we must hereafter protect ourselves, why not do it for ourselves? Why do it for another? The English list of ships of war is long and formidable, but not a 10th part of them are at any time fit for service. Numbers of them are not in being, yet their names are prominently continued in the list. If only a plank be left of the ship, and not a 5th part of such are fit for service, can be spared at any one station at one time, the East and West Indies, Mediterranean, Africa, and all other parts. So I'm saying, like, yeah, okay, she's got a big navy on paper, but they're not all in repair. They can't all be here, so we got a chance. All right. Britain extends her claim, makes large demands upon her navy. From a mixture of prejudice and inattention, we have contracted a false notion respecting the Navy of England, and have talked as if we should have the whole of it to encounter at once, and for that reason suppose that we might have one as large, which not being instantly practicable, just go with that, has been made use of by a set of disguised Tories to discourage our beginning thereon. Nothing can be further from the truth than this, for if America had only a 20th part of the naval force of Britain, she would be by far an overmatch for her, because as we neither have nor claim any foreign dominion, our whole force would be employed to our own coast, where we should, in the long run, have 2 to 1 the advantage of those who had 3 or 4 or 4,000 miles to sail over before they could attack us, and the same distance return in order to refit and recruit. And although Britain by her fleet hath check over trade to Europe, we have as large a one over the trade over the West Indies, which by laying in the neighborhood of the continent lies entirely at its mercy. So again, he's just going on like, they got a lot to deal with, and we're real close. They're real far. Blah, blah, blah. Let's build a navy. All right. I think he's going to go on for the navy for a while. Some method might it be fallen on to keep up a naval force in the time of peace, if we should judge it necessary to support a constant navy. If premiums were to be given to merchants to build and employ their service ships mounted with 20, 30, or 50 guns, the premiums to be in proportion to the loss bulk to the merchant. 50 or 60 of those ships, with a few guardsmen on constant duty, would keep up a sufficient navy, and that without burdening ourselves with the evil of so loudly complained of in England, or suffering their fleet in time of peace to lie rotting in the docks. To unite the sinews of commerce and defense is sound policy. For when our strength and our riches play into each other's hands, we need fear no external enemy. In almost every article of defense, we abound. Hemp flourishes even to the rankness, so that we need not want cordage. We got rope. Our iron is superior to that of all other countries. Our small arms equal to any in the world. Cannon we can cast at pleasure. Saltpeter and gunpowder are we are every day producing. Our knowledge is hourly improving. Resolution is our inherent character, and courage hath never forsaken us. Wherefore is it that we want? Why is it that we hesitate? From Britain we can expect nothing but ruin. If she once admitted to the government of America again, this continent will not be worth living in. Jealousy will always be arising. Insurrections will be constantly happening. And who will go forth to quell them? Who will venture his life to reduce his own countrymen to a foreign obedience? The difference between Pennsylvania and Connecticut, respecting some unlocated lands, shows the insignificance of British government, and fully proves that nothing but continental authority can regulate the continental matters. He's also a big federalist, if that's not clear. Another reason why the present time is preferable to all others is the fewer the number we are, the more land is yet unoccupied, which instead of being lavished by the king on his worthless dependents may be after applied not only to the discharge of the present debt, but to the constant support of government. No nation under heaven hath such advantage as this. The infant state of the colonies, as it is called so far for being against, is an argument in favor of independence. We are sufficiently numerous, and we are more so we might be less unified. 'Tis a matter worthy of observation that the more a country is peopled, the smaller their armies are. In military numbers, the ancients far exceeded the moderns, and their reason is evident, for trade being the consequence of population, men become too much absorbed thereby to attend anything else. Commerce diminishes the spirit of both patriotism and military defense, and history sufficiently informs us the bravest achievements were always accomplished by the non-age of a nation. With the increase of commerce, England hath lost its spirit. The city of London, notwithstanding its numbers, submits to the continued insults with the patience of a coward. The more men have to lose, the less willing they are to venture. The rich are in general slaves to fear, and submit to courtly power with the trembling duplicity of a spaniel. His burns for the British are by far the hardest of all burns. It's kind of making this classic point, this kind of point you hear a lot of people make all throughout history of, a soft, luxurious life makes people not want to fight. He's like, so this is an advantage to old USA. Youth is the seed time of good habits, as well in nations as individuals. It might be difficult, if not impossible, to form the continent into one government half a century hence. The vast variety of interest occasioned by increase of trade and population would create confusion. Colony would be against colony, each being able to scorn each other's assistance, and while the proud and foolish glorified in their little distinctions, the wise would lament that the union had not been formed before. Wherefore the present time is that true time for establishing it. The intimacy to which contradicted the infancy which is contracted by the infancy, and the friendships which is formed in the misfortune, are there of all others the most lasting and unalterable. Our present union is marked with both these characters. We are young, and we have been distressed, but our concord hath withstood our troubles, and fixes a memorable era for prosperity and to glory in. Okay, so he's moved on from the Navy, and he's saying, if we're going to form a continental country, we need to do it now. We can't wait, because then all the little divisions between each colony are going to grow, and it's going to be too late. All right. Hey, puppy. The present time likewise is that particular time which never happens to a nation but once, the time of forming itself into a government. Most nations had let slip the opportunity, and by that means have been compelled to receive laws from their conquerors, instead of making laws for themselves. First they had a king, and then a form of government, whereas the articles or charter of government should be formed first, and the men delegated to execute them afterwards. But from the errors of other nations let us learn wisdom, and lay hold the present opportunity to begin government at the right end. This is a really good point. He's like, all these other governments, their big problem is they had a leader first, and then they kind of formed a government around them. This is the wrong way to go for it. Form a government, and then pick your leaders after that to fill in the holes of the government, not the other way around. When William the Conqueror subdued England, he gave them law at the point of a sword, and until we contest that, the seat of government in America will be legally, authoritatively occupied. We shall be in danger of having it filled by some fortunate ruffian who may treat us in the same manner, and then where will be our freedom? Where will be our prosperity? Oh, man. As to religion, I hold it that it be indispensable duty of government to protect all conscientious professors therefore, and I know of no other business which government hath to do therewith. So you have to protect religion, but then that's it. Let a man throw aside that narrowness of soul, that selfish of principle. I'm not saying that. I know that's not the same word, but I'm not risking it on Twitch. Of all professions are so unwilling to depart with, and that he will be at once delivered of the fears of on the head. Suspicion is the companion of mean souls, and the bane of all good society. For myself, I fully and consciously believe that it is with the will of the Almighty that there should be a diversity of religion opinion among us. It affords a larger field for our Christian kindness, where we all of one way of thinking. Our religion dispositions would want a matter for probation, and on this liberal principle I look at the various denominations among us to be like children of the same family, differing only in what is called their Christian names. So even he's a pretty hardcore Christian, but even this early, it's like whenever someone says he's like, oh, separation of church and state's not in the Constitution, it's in all their writing. They all write about it. All of them. It's crazy. You can go through it. They knew what they were talking about. It's not a mystery. Anybody says like, oh, they don't know what the founding fathers were thinking. Yes, we do. We really, really do. In page 97, I threw out a few thoughts on the property of a continental charter, for I only presume to offer hints, not plans. And so he's a big picture kind of guy. And in this place, I take the liberty of re-mentioning the subject by observing that a charter is to be understood as a bond of solemn obligation, which the whole enters into, to support the right of every separate part, whether a religion, professional freedom, or property, a firm bargaining, and a right of reckoning to make long friends. Hey, puppy. What's up, doggy? Come here. I have hitherto likewise mentioned to a necessity of a large and equal representation, and there is no political matter which more deserves our attention. A small number of electors or small number of representatives are equally dangerous. But if the number of representatives is not only small but unequal, the danger is increased. As an instance of this, I mention the following. When a petition of the association was before the House of an Assembly of Pennsylvania, 28 members only were present. All the Buck all the Bucks Country members, being 8, voted against it, and the 7 of the Chester members done the same. The whole province had been governed by 2 counties only, and the danger it is always exposed to. The unwarrantable stretched likewise, which was the House made in their last sitting to gain undue authority over the delegates of the province, ought to warn the people at large how their trust power out. This is like really wordy for what he's trying to say. All right. At the set of instructions for the delegates were to put together, which in point of sense and business were to have dishonored a schoolboy, and after being approved by a very few, without doors, were carried into the house and were passed in by half the whole colony. Whereas did the whole colony know with what ill will the House had entered the same necessity of public measures, and that would not hesitate the moment to think them unworthy of such trust. All right. Blah, 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 blah. So he's talking about, this is the beginning of, he's like, you can, they're already thinking, this is before the Articles of Confederation, this is before the Constitution. They're thinking about these, there's people here thinking about this, like multiple forms of representation. Like these 2 counties were basically, even though there were only 2 counties of all the ones in Philadelphia, just these 2 people like ganging up killed all the representation of all the rest of the colony. So this is like the beginnings of like House, Senate, the kind of like the same kind of feelings of these like big, wide representation of different kinds and amounts of people. All right. This is like, they're thinking about it. They're thinking about it. Oh. Immediate necessity makes many things convenient, which is continued would grow into oppressions. Expedience and the rights are different things. When the calamities of America required a consultation, there is no method so ready, or at the time so proper, as to appoint persons from several houses of assembly for that purpose, and the wisdom of which they had proceeded hath preserved this continent from ruin. But as it is more than probable that we shall never be without a Congress, every well-wisher to good order must own that mode for choosing members of the body deserves consideration. All right. And I put it as a question to those who make the study of mankind whether representation and election is not too great a power for one and the same body of men to possess. When we are planning for prosperity, we ought to remember that virtue is not hereditary. Whew. All right, so he's already getting the war. These like, they're talking about this like separations. We don't want the same people like choosing that are making the laws. And this is the first kind of steps to it. But let's see where it goes with it. It is from our enemies that we are often gain excellent maxims, and are frequently surprised into reason by their mistakes. Mr. Cornwall, one of the Lords of the Treasury, treated the petition of the New York Assembly with contempt because that house, he said, consisted of but 26 members, which trifling number, he argued, could not with decency be put for the whole. We thank him for this involuntary honesty. So we need plenty of representatives. The more representatives you are having, the more representative there are of their people they're representing. To conclude, however strange it may appear to some, and however unwilling they may be to think so, matters not, but many strong and striking reasons may be given to show that nothing can settle our affairs so expeditiously as an open and determined declaration for independence, some of which are. Okay, so it's going to go for the actual. I wonder how. Maybe I should open up the Declaration of Independence and have a look of how they compare. First, it is the custom of nations, when any two are at war, for some other powers not engaged in the quarrel to step in as mediators and bring about the preliminaries of peace. But while America calls herself the subject of Great Britain, no power, however well disposed she may be, can offer her mediation. Wherefore, in our present state, we may quarrel on forever. Okay, so we need to get. So we're at war with Britain. And if we want others to intervene and mediate and propose peace, we have to be separate, or they will just see it as some internal affair that they have no reason to mediate for. Secondly, it is unreasonable to suppose that France or Spain will give us any kind of assistance if we mean only to make use of that assistance for the purpose of repairing the breach and strengthening the connection between Britain and America, because those powers would be sufferers by the consequences. So while it's unreasonable to think that France or Spain will help us at all, if we mean to only make use of that assistance for the purpose of repairing the breach. So we need to at least have France or Spain involved in the talks, because that'll force Britain to talk, I guess. I'm kind of confused by this. Okay, it is unreasonable to suppose that France or Spain will give us any assistance if we mean only to make use of that assistance for the purpose of repairing the breach. Oh, okay, I misunderstood. So, France or Spain, they won't help us if we only expect them to help us make happy with Britain. They need to benefit this as well. They need to know that, like, hey, we'll be a nice, free, independent country. It'll be really great to trade with us, wouldn't it be? All right. While we profess ourselves at the subject of Britain, we must, in the eyes of foreign nation, be considered as rebels. Well, let me reread that. While we profess ourselves the subjects of Britain, we must, in the eyes of foreign nation, be considered as rebels. The precedent, and somewhat dangerous to their peace, for men to be in arms under the name of subjects, we on the spot can solve that paradox. But to unite resistance and subjugation requires the idea of much too refined for common understanding. Okay. It's kind of going off this last point. I don't know. That was a separate point. Were a manifesto to be published and dispatched to foreign courts, settling forth the miseries we have endured and the peaceful methods which we had ineffectually used to redress, declaring at the same time that not being able longer to live happily or safely under the cruel disposition of the Britain court, we had been driven to the necessity of breaking off all connections with her at the same time. All right, so we need to send out dispatches for courts saying, like, hey, we tried for peace. We were driven to this. But at the same time, assuring us that all courts of our peaceable disposition towards them, and that our desire for entering into trade with them, such as a memorial, would produce more good effects to this continent than a ship, were frightened with petitions to Britain. Okay. So yeah, it's like, hey, we try to be peaceful with them. We're forced to this. We'll be peaceful with you. Like, look at all this great trade we could do. Remember all that stuff I was talking about ships earlier? All that stuff we could do to build ships? All right. Under our present domination of British subjects, we can neither be received nor heard abroad. The customs of all courts is against us, and will be so until in independence we take rank with the other nations. These proceedings may at first seem strange and difficult, but like all other steps which we have already passed over, will be in little time become familiar and agreeable, and until an independence is declared, the continent will feel itself like a man who continues putting off some unpleasant business from day to day, yet knows it must be done, hates to set about it, wishes it over, and continuously haunted with the thoughts of necessity. It's like, all right, we're just putting off the painful thing. Like, we just got to go through with it. We got to do it. Appendix to Common Sense. All right. When was the appendix written? All right, 75. Okay. We're getting close to the end. Appendix to Common Sense. Since the publication of the first edition of this pamphlet, or rather on the same day which it came out, the King's Speech made its appearance in this city, Philadelphia. Had the spirit of prophecy directed the birth of this production, it could not have brought it forth at a more sensible juncture, or at a more necessary time. The bloody mindedness of the one who shows the necessity of pursuing the doctrine of the other. Men read by the way of revenge, and the speech, instead of terrifying, prepared a way for the manly principles of independence. So the first edition came out at the same time as the British King, so that's kind of interesting. Because this is a continuation, it's the appendix. Ceremony and even silence, from whatever motives they may arise, have a hurtful tendency when they give the least degree of countenance to base and wicked performances. Wherefore, if this maxim is omitted, it naturally follows that the King's Speech, as being a piece of finished villainy, deserved and still deserves a general execration both by the Congress and the people. Yet as the domestic tranquility of a nation depends largely on the chastity of what might properly be called a national matters, it is often better to pass some things over in silent disdain than make use of such new methods of dislike as might introduce the least innovation on that guardian of our peace and safety. And perhaps it is chiefly owing to the prudent delicacy that the King's Speech hath not before now suffered a public execution. The speech, if it may be called one, is nothing better than a willful, audacious libel against the truth. Dude, when he gets mad, he spits it, man. He's like, this speech is fucking bullshit. All right. The common good and the existence of mankind and the formal and pompous method of offering up human sacrifices to the pride of tyrants. But this general massacre of mankind is one of the privileges and the certain consequence of kings. For as nature knows them not, they know not her. And although they are beings of our own creating, they know not us. Okay. Oh. It's like he wants to tongue twist me. And are become of gods of their own creators. The speech hath not one good quality, which is that it is not calculated to deceive, neither can we, even if we would, be deceived by it. Brutality and tyranny appear on the face of it. It leaves us at no loss, and every line convinces, even in the moment of reading, that he who haunts the woods for prayer, the naked and untutored Indian, is less savage than the King of Britain. Racist, but a burn to the British nonetheless. I wish I had this speech. I really... All right. Sir John Dalrymple, the punitive father of whining. Just how do you pronounce this? Jesuit. Oh, I hate these. I don't think so. Jesuit piece, felicitously called the Address of the People of England to the Inhabitants of America, hath perhaps from a vain wow, 2 words in a row that I don't. Supposition. Jesus, why am I so bad at speaking? Maybe this is good practice for me. That people here were to be frightened at the pomp and description of a king given, though very unwisely on his part, the real character of his present one. But, says the writer, if you are inclined to pay compliments to an administration which we do not complain of, meaning the Marquis of Rockingham and the repeal of the Stamp Act, it is very unfair if you to withhold them from that prince, by whose not alone they were permitted to do anything. This is Toryism with a witness. Here is idolatry even without a mask. And he who can calmly hear and digest such doctrine hath forfeited his claim to rationality, an apostate from the order of manhood, and ought to be considered as one who hath not only given up the proper dignity of a man, but sunk himself beneath the rank of animals, and contemptibility crawls through the world like a worm. Damn. Saying this about this. Oh, I'm telling you. It's fucking trash talk. He's got to be like top 10 all-time trash talker. Whenever he gets mad about something, he goes off. Sunk himself beneath the rank of animals, and contemptibly crawls through the world like a worm. Goddamn. However, it matters very little now what the King of England either says or does. He hath wickedly broken through every moral and human obligation, trampled nature and conscience beneath his feet, and by the steady constitutional spirit of insolence and cruelty procured for himself a universal hatred. It is now the interest of America to provide for herself. She hath already a large and young family, whom it is more her duty to take care of than to be granted away by her property. To support a power who is become a reproach of the names, members, and Christians, ye, whose office it is to watch the morals of a nation, of whatever sect or domination ye are of. We need to bring back ye. As well as ye who are more immediately and guardians of the public liberty. If ye wish to preserve your national country of uncontaminated by European corruption, ye must in secret wish a separation, but leaving the moral part of private reflection, I shall chiefly confine my further remarks to the following heads. All right. So this is just his preamble. This is after the king sent his letter. History boy, hi, what is up? All right, so let's see where he goes into. I remember reading Common Sense in high school, but coming back to it, like, kind of have some more appreciation for it. He is I think he's one of the best trash talker of all time. First, I need to go. What I'm going to do after I'm done reading this, I'm going back through this, and I'm copying and pasting all his, you look like you would be an American history teacher. Well, that was actually my first plan when I went to college, but I had to drop out of college for financial reasons. I needed to work and make money real fast because of a few reasons. But I wasn't. I was going to college for history and economics, but then yeah, I I dropped out after. I had to drop out. I was only like I think a semester and a half away from graduating. Maybe one day I'll go back, but for now I just read books on the internet. All right. First, that it is the interest of America to be separated from Britain. All right. Secondly, which is the easiest and most practicable plan, reconciliation or independence, with some occasional remarks. All right. So this is probably going to be a recap of a lot of the stuff that he was talking about earlier in the second part of this. All right. In support of the first, I could, if judged improper, produce the opinion of some of the ablest and most experienced men on the continent, and whose sentiments on that head are not yet publicly known. It is in reality a self-evident position, for no nation in a state of foreign dependence, limited in its commerce and cramped and fettered in its legislation powers, could ever arrive at any material eminence. America doth not yet know what opulence is, and although the progress which she hath made stands unparalleled in the history of other nations, it is but childhood compared with what she would be capable of striving at, and she ought to have the legislative powers in her hands. All right, so this he's going back and he's going like he's kind of just covering some of the points that he did earlier of, we're young, we're at a really self-evident position, nobody can thrive under the occupation or domination of monarchy. All right, so this whole thing is like saying, all right, bitches, we're doing this independence thing, let's go. But all right, America doth not yet know what opulence is. Oh, yeah, this and the opulence thing is going back to that kind of old timey thought of soft times, all that stuff. England is at the time proudly God, I'm so bad at pronouncing things. Coveting what would do her no good, were she to accomplish it, and by the continent hesitating on the matter, which will be her final ruin if neglected. It is the commerce and not the conquest of America by which England is to be benefited, and that would be in great measure to continue were the countries as independent of it's surprisingly a fun read. I'm kind of like winding down at the end of it, but the first two parts are a lot of fun. This last part, it seems like this is more like directed of people at the time, but his first part of he goes over it's kind of like a John Locke kind of state of nature, these are how governments form, and then he's his next part was this is why monarchies just suck ass, and his third part was all right, this is why America needs to be independent, and then he goes on a long tangent about this is why we need navies. This is why navies are so cool. He goes on a little autistic rant of oh, navies are just the best, we need navies. And now he's just this last part is a little harder to parse because a lot of this is in response to what other people are writing, like this King's speech. We can talk about economics too. You should look at social, but don't try to like moralize your economic systems. That should come second. Morality, like, don't think of like, oh, this is the right reason to do this economic thing. You should what am I trying to say? Like, how am I trying to put this? You're not going to make the right economics decisions and like this on like going like, oh, this is the right thing, because it might not be. You don't know that, and you can moralize outcomes in other ways besides like systems. Not to get too into the weeds of this, but I don't know if I had any advice on like, don't choose an economic system. Be like, this is my baby. Be outcome oriented in things. Like, don't be like, oh, I'm a capitalist or I'm a socialist. Be like, this is the most beneficial, and then go from there. You know, if you have to fix things later, like, which is better for if you're an individual and you're like, oh, I could live in a socialist system or a capitalist system. You know, like, oh, I might be better in this socialist system. Yeah, everything does. Every single thing does. But do you want to go? If the problem I see, especially on Twitch, for some reason, I see this like this moralization of this is like, are you better off? It might be in a less fair system, but are you better off? So if I lived in a social system, like, things might be more fair, but let's say I live in a capitalist system that's more successful. Well, I might not be better off. It might be less fair, but could I make up this difference in other ways? Like let's say in like Sweden, they have a pretty capitalist country, but they very like have a huge welfare state, and then most people are okay with that, and they have like certain socialist systems. So like, don't pick and choose the good things from every economic system. That seems to work in the most successful places. They're not ideologically bought into like their thing. But anyway, but it is the independence of this country, of Britain or any other, which is now the main and only object worthy of contention, and by which, like all other truths discovered by necessity, will appear clear and stronger every day. All right. So he's going into, kind of lost my train of thought. With when people's basic needs are met, they are more innovative, and of course it is still about implementation or socialism. Is a bit iffy. I think my only thing with maybe it's not even socialism per se, but at least the advocates for socialism is, maybe they're just bad advocates that I usually listen to. Maybe I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. There's nothing in like a socialist system that can't be accomplished in a capitalist system. Like, if you want a worker co-op, which is like the most idealized socialist firm, all the workers own all the means of production. You can do that in a capitalist system. And I feel like the advocates of socialism are like always like, oh, this is what we need. Everybody needs to do this. It's like, just advocate for more of that stuff. If it works, people like it, they'll do it. If it's profitable, they're making money, they're happier, people will do it. But I don't know. It usually feels like a lot of talk with people like that. They don't actually go through with these ideas. Every time there's trying to be like a top-down method, it hasn't gone well. Anytime there's been and nobody ever tried a a bottom up approach. Not that I can think of, anyway. All right. First, because it will become to that one time or another. Secondly, because the longer it is delayed, the harder it will be to accomplish. All right. So it's going back to the. We need this independent thing now. If we wait, it won't work, and it'll be harder. Things won't be as good. All right. About the third or fourth time he's gone through that. I frequently amuse myself, both in public and in private companies, with silently remarking the specious errors of those who speak without reflecting. And among the many which I have heard, the following seems most general. Vis-a-vis, that this has happened 40 or 50 years hence. Instead of now, the continent would have been more able to have shaken off the independence, to which I reply that our military ability at this time arises from the experience gained in the last war, in which in 40 or 50 years' time would be totally extinct. The continent would not, by that time, have a general or even a military officer left, and we, or those that may succeed us, would be ignorant of the martial matters as the ancient Indians. Okay. So this is, again, he's going with... a lot of people are saying, like, oh, like, we'd be better. A lot of people at the time are saying, like, oh, we'd be a lot better off if we just waited to do this. When we were bigger, we had more people. We'd have build a bigger. It's like, we have the men now. We have the experience now from the 7 Years' War and the French and Indian Wars. Ironically called, because the French and Indians were on the same side. So he's like, now's the time. And we have experienced generals. We had Washington. In 50 years, they'll all be dead. All right. Would be to ignore... Where was I at? Would be ignorant of martial matters as the ancient Indians. All right. And this single position, closely attended to, will unanswerably prove that the present time is preferable to all others. The argument turns thus. At the conclusion of the last war, we had experience, but wanted numbers. And 40, 50 years hence, we shall have numbers without experience. Wherefore, the proper point of time must be at some particular point between the two extremes, in which a sufficiency of the former remains and the proper increase of the latter obtained. And that point of time is the present time. I do believe healthcare should be considered a right instead of a private interest they can use to make money off. I would agree with you 99% of the time. Like, but also, like, there's two things with that. Is that, you don't need a socialist system to have healthcare as a right. We have plenty of countries in, like, Western Europe and Canada that shows a capitalist system is completely capable of sustaining and providing a free healthcare. The benefits that someone else could argue of why you would want some form of profitable healthcare is in the innovation and, like, the pharmaceuticals. Like, while the American healthcare system's really, really rough on the patient a lot of the times, if you don't have, like, you know, good insurance or stuff like that, and the for-profit thing is kind of gross. It still way leads in innovation of, like, new treatments and pharmaceuticals and medical technology. So there's some benefit that comes from it. is that worth, is losing if you would lose some advancement, how much advancement are you willing to lose for the free healthcare? I think most people would say a good amount, and I think I would agree with that. But like, yeah, there's trade offs with everything. It's just to keep that thing in mind. But yeah, I would agree with you 95%. I think I'm with you like 95% that healthcare should be considered a right. But I don't think that's system dependent. The reader will the reader will pardon this discretion as it does not properly come under the head I first set out with, and to which again return by the following position vis-a-vis. All right, so he's going back again. Yeah. Well, this is his appendices, so I'm guessing a lot of this he's just going over points he's already made. Should affairs be patched up with Britain, and she should to remain the government and sovereign power of America, which as matters are now circumstanced, is giving up to the point entirely, we shall deprive ourselves of the very means of sinking the debt we have, or may contract the value of the backlands. I don't know what he means by this term, of the backlands, which some of the provinces are clandestinely deprived of by the unjust extension of the limits of Canada, valued only at £5 sterling per 100 acres, amount to upward of 25 million Pennsylvania currency, and the quilt rents at 1 penny sterling per acre to 2 million yearly. So some of these terms, these are some really old-timey terms. Value of the backlands are probably just lands at more the interior of the country. I guess I could just Google it. Backlands. This is probably not going to come up with anything helpful. The hinterlands. Okay, yeah, so coming the more on a part of this. Some of the provinces don't have a lot of this, but the unjust extension of the limits of Canada. And this is valued very low. Okay. So they're saying if we made peace with Britain, we're screwing ourselves financially. Let's really go with that. Summing it up real quick. All right. It is by the sale of those lands that the debt may be sunk without burthen. That must be an old-timey way to say burden to any, and the quit rent reserve therefore will always lessen, and in time will wholly support the yearly expense of government. It matters not how long the debt is in paying, so that the lands would be sold to be applied to the discharge of it, and for the execution of which Congress, for the time being, will be the Continental Trustees. Okay. So we have all this empty land. We can survive the debt of this war. We'll be able to sell that land off to farmers, settlers, whatever. It won't be that big a deal. I proceed now to the second head vis-a-vis, which is the easiest and most practicable plan, reconciliation or independence, with some occasional remarks. He who takes nature for his guide is not easily beaten out of his argument, and on that ground I answer generally that independence, being a single simple line contained within ourselves, and reconciliation a matter of exceedingly perplexed and complicated, and in which a treacherous, capricious court is to interfere, gives us the answer without a doubt. think this is kind of like an Occam's razor almost argument. All right. The present state of America is truly alarming to every man who is capable of reflection, without law, without government, without any other mode of power than what is founded on and granted by courtesy, held together by an unexampled occurrence of sentiment which is nevertheless subject to change, and which every secret enemy is endeavored to dissolve. Our present condition is legislation without law, wisdom and without a plan, a constitution without a name, and what is strangely astonishing, perfect independence contending for dependence. Like, that's this is a strangely astonishing, perfect independence. It's like, why are these the two options? Why is this even a question? Independence or dependence? The instance is without a precedent. The case never existed before, and who can tell what may be the event? The property of no man is secure in the present unbraced system of things. The mind of the multitude is left at random, and seeing no fixed object before them, they pursue each other as fancy or opinion presents. Nothing is criminal. There is no such thing as treason, whereas everyone thinks himself at liberty to act as he pleases. The Tories would have dared to assemble offensively had they known that their lives by that act were forfeited by the laws of the state. A line of distinction should be drawn between English soldiers taken in battle and inhabitants of America taken in arms. The first are prisoners, but the latter are traitors. This one forfeits his liberty, the other his head. I think capitalism should be better, could work better if adopted basic needs fulfilling such as shelter, food, education, health, and water, and the things that aren't the basic needs could be privatized. Sure. Yeah. Those things would be, I think since post-war, that's kind of been the movement of governments with like capitalist systems, is that it's kind of said deriding, like dismissively now, of like the welfare state, but that was kind of like the idea after kind of like fascism was defeated, and countries that didn't want to go communist is like, all right, yeah, we need a system here to take care of the workers, but we still want the motors of the markets. So we're gonna, skim up the profits of the market to uplift everyone to some kind of basic needing. And I think, depending on government to government, a lot of these things are either partially or taken care of decently well. I can't think of a lot of, like, at least in the developed world, of like, there's not a lot of starvation in the food thing. Like, shelter can get, well, there's housing crisis and stuff, but on par of like historically, and in a, like, housing is okay as long as the incentive to build is there. And like right now America's a lot of problem with housing because of just how awful the zoning laws are. People don't want to build where people are right now because of don't get me started on zoning laws. I'm not going into that. I'm gonna stop. I'm stopping myself there. It's so bad. Yeah, but at least like education. Yeah, that's one thing that I think welfare states are extremely good at least up until college. Then things get messy and divisive. But yeah, but for some of those things, I think markets do a pretty good, if not better than most of the times that if they were not privatized. Like food is one thing I think the market does very well. Like there's times of like right now is a bad time for food, but like starvation is not a real big problem. Like I think like every starvation death in the United States like the last year was caused by some other condition that the people had, like some kind of disease where they couldn't absorb nutrients or something, like, but it was still a starvation death. Like food may be expensive or bad, but usually the markets can adjust for food pretty well. But water, I can see that being a thing that might be taken away from privatization. But yeah, give me 1 second. I'll be right back. One thing I do believe is kind of lost for capitalism is that things are done for profit than for the good of humanity. Sure, but that's what you want capitalism to do. You don't you don't want your morality to come from the capitalist system. You want it just to be the engine of the economy. You should derive your you should get your humanity from something else. You should use the profit that you would gain from that. Like, I mean, this I'm getting into like my opinion. I'm not trying to get too political on this, but take that engine that's creating all this profit, skim off what you need to make sure humanity is taken care of, and then just let that be a non-feeling machine that just makes stuff. Let it do that, and that usually does better for people. It might not be like fair and like just, but it just needs to be a machine that makes stuff, and then you take what you need from it and you redistribute it if you have to. Or that's why I've this is my hottest take. The the best thing in the world, the greatest equalizer, are taxes. Oh my gosh, you can do anything with taxes. You can moralize, you can redistribute, you can make things. Oh, dude, I love taxes. I hate paying them, but God, I love taxes. You can do magical things with taxes. That's my hottest take. That nobody. I love taxes. All right. Notwithstanding our wisdom, there is visible feebleness in some of our proceedings, which gives encouragement to dissensions. Dissensions. The continental belt is too loosely buckled, and if something is not done in time, it will be too late to do anything, and we shall fall into the state of which neither reconciliation nor independence will be practical. The king and his worthless adherents are got at their old game of dividing the continent. There will be not wanting among us printers who will be busy in spreading specious falsehood. The artful and hypocritical letter which appeared a few months ago in the 2 New York papers, and likewise the other 2, is evidence that there are men who want both judgment and honesty. So he's going off on the loyalist in America at this point. There was a person in my class who argued against higher taxes for the rich because the poor, because rich, they can't become richer, which is my argument. Yeah, I don't know. That argument this person is talking about makes no sense. I don't know. Are you in... I don't know what the tax systems are in Europe, so I don't know if you're in America or Europe, but like the progressive tax system, which I think most European countries, okay, yeah, the progressive tax system in America is, I think, one of the best forms of legislation ever made. It's fucking brilliant. Of every step up you make, you only get taxed on that amount. Everybody misunderstands this. I don't know if this will show up on fucking my shitty webcam, but I'll try. Oh, try to do this left-handed. I need to move this so I can actually write on this. Oh man, that's really bad. But I remember this. Somebody was making a similar argument when I was in school, and they're like, I remember I got in a fight with her. This girl, she said something so stupid. She's like, "Oh, my dad didn't want to take his raise because he was going to move into the next tax bracket, and he was going to make less money." And I was just like, "You're lying. That didn't happen." Because it's like, all right, let's say you make $1,000, you get taxed 10%. So you make $1,000, you'd pay $100 in taxes. It's like, oh man, you make 10,000. Let's say your tax bracket is 20%. Why am I trying to do this left-handed? This is so bad. And she was like, oh yeah, then I would have to pay $2,000. That would suck. I'm like, no, you would pay $100 for your first 1,000, and then you'd pay 20% on your next 900. So you would, this guy that made $1,000 to pay 100, you would pay 100 plus 20% of fucking 9,000. Holy shit, 1,800 plus 1,800. It's like, no, because you wouldn't pay 20% on that first 1,000. So it's great. Taxes are fucking, the progressive tax system is beautiful. So you could, and it doesn't go that high. Our tax bracket should go all the way up to 99%. Just keep going and going and going and going. Because you're always, you're never disincentivized to make more money. You might not make as much as you would if there was no tax there, but you're still making more money no matter what. So you're always incentivized to make more money, no matter how high the progressive tax system goes. So it makes no sense. You're still incentivized, and you can take those taxes and you can do things like, you know, free school lunches or provide more health care. It's great. There's incentives to make money, which means if incentives are the one thing you should always think about in anything. You think about politics, history, Economics is what are the incentives that people have. It'll explain so much of human behavior, and anytime like you read history, you'll be like, what are the incentives behind this? What is driving this? Things that don't make sense will make sense. It's like, so you have the incentive to make money, grow the economy, invest money, because you're always still making money, even if you're getting taxed on it. You make more money, you make more money. So there's nothing wrong with higher taxes in that regard. Is if you're gonna make, oh, you go up a tax bracket, like, oh, I could have made, oh, $9,000, but I'm only making $7,000 extra dollars. It's like, you're still fucking gonna do it. Yeah, I don't think this is showing up at all. But I don't know. You get the point. Oh, and my mic's blocking it. Didn't even notice that. Well, that's my general point. Yeah, but that's a really dumb argument. Yeah, that's why I say taxes are my favorite thing. It's my hard opinion. You can also incentivize certain things by tax breaks. One thing that's really good for the economy is more people, and it's like, people don't want to have babies. Like the child tax credit, the Biden child tax credit. While this is actually a bad example, because tax credits usually don't incentivize childbirth. That's the thought behind a lot of like child tax credit. It usually doesn't actually work, but you want more people because you want more workers, because you want more growth. It's like, oh, taxes could be a good. Of course, I picked the wrong example with kids, but for most things, it's like cigarette taxes work. Every time you raise the taxes on cigarettes, it lowers the amount of people smoking. Same thing with alcohol, sugar. If you want to incentivize good and healthy things, taxes are, and it's like a perfect lever for a government to pull, because anytime you like pass a law, there's a lot of unknowns that could happen. It's like, oh, we're gonna like regulate this industry. It might cause some side effects that you weren't expecting. A tax, because you know exactly the incentive. There's one input. There's not multiple inputs, so you're reducing complexity. So, and for things to go wrong. All right. Anyway, that's just my opinion. I'm just using that on. I'm just going off what usually success rates. I'm not really worried about moralizing my like government economic system. I want to be more outcome resulted than like making a decision that'll make me feel better. Like, it might feel better to do this law that'll be like, oh, we're gonna feed 1,000 children with this bill. It's like, oh man, I feel really great about that. But it's like, maybe if I did like a more boring, like, oh, I'm gonna lift a tariff on wheat from Mexico. It's like, wow, oh, maybe that would have fed 10,000 children, but it wasn't sexy or exciting. It was just like, oh, it was just some boring thing, and people took care of the rest. Anyway, all right. Let's see if Thomas Paine is still bitching about Tories and Crown loyalists. Put us, say some, on the footing we were in the year 1763, to which I answer, the request is not now in the power of Britain to comply with, or neither will she propose it. But if it were, and even should it be granted, all right, so he's saying like, some people are saying like, oh, let's go back to how it was at this point 12 years ago of his writing. And he's saying, Britain can't do that, and she won't do it because now that we have done this independence thing, they're not going to let it just go back to how things were if we back out now. I ask as a reasonable question, by which means is such a corrupt and faithless court to be kept to its engagements? Another parliament, nay, even the present, may hereafter repel the obligation on the pretense of it being violently obtained or unwisely granted. And in that case, where is our redress? All right. One argument I saw against social is that it makes things less efficient, which could be a valid argument, but it's always delivered in such a bad way. They deliver it by saying that there are two cities, and you would build a railroad between them, but there's a mountain. They said that the socialists would go around the mountain, but the capitalists would go through it because of resources, but it may not be the argument verbatim, but I think I captured pretty close. Yeah, this is a nonsensical argument. The difference between a socialist firm and a capitalist firm is they both have certain incentives to grow and do things, but the capitalist has incentives to investors. Socialist firms by nature don't have investors, or they're a capitalist firm. There's a lot of fuzzy lines that people like a market socialist. They're like, oh, you could have investors and stuff, and it's like, because the point of a socialist firm is that it's owned by the workers, which is fine, but they don't have. God, I'm going down. I keep going down rabbit holes. I need to stay on topic. Sorry. All right. Let me read your question again. One argument I saw is that it makes it less efficient. It could be a valid argument, but it's still in a bad way. Yeah, whoever made that analogy doesn't make any sense. Yeah, a capitalist firm wants to make profit because they have people they need to pay back. The socialist firm isn't always incentivized to maximize profits because their owners are the workers, so they have other incentives besides profits. Like, I don't want to work as much, which is a pretty powerful incentive. So, usually, historically, socialist firms are good in certain, like a worker-owned co-op, which is usually like the go-to example for any kind of socialist firm, which do well in certain industries as well as capitalist firms, but in other ones they do not. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head. It's not something I've looked into for a while. But a capitalist firm is much more motivated by profit. That is their incentive. Their incentive is to pay back their shareholders and their loaners, so they can get more shareholders and loans to make more money, grow, and make profit, because that is their incentive to go. So they like I was saying earlier, the most important thing you want to know is like what their incentive system are. So it ends up being that the capitalist firms are usually more efficient because their incentives are to be more efficient because you want more profit. A socialist firm has less incentives to be efficient because they don't have to pay back shareholders, if that makes sense. Which also means they have less incentives to grow. Not saying they have none, but they have less. All right. To be on the footing of 1763, it is not sufficient that the laws only be put in the same state, but our circumstances likewise be put in the same state. Our burnt and destroyed towns repaired or built up, our private losses made good, our public debts contracted for defense discharged. Otherwise, we shall be millions worse than we were at that inevitable period. Such a request, had it been compiled with a few years ago, would have won the heart and soul of the continent, but now it is too late. The Rubicon has passed. So, yeah, it's going like, we've already spent too much to just go back to pre-revolution. Let's make that point again. Besides the taking of arms merely to enforce the repeal of pecuniary law seems to be as unwarrantable by the divine law as it is repugnant to the human feelings, as the taking up of arms to enforce obedience thereto. The object of either side doth not justify the means, for the lives of men are too valuable. So we shouldn't, basically saying, it's like, it's talking to the people that are kind of saying like, oh, we should just make a deal with Britain to kind of go back to how things were before all the intolerable acts. He's like, if that's the case, we should have never taken up arms. Like, going back and doing all the things we've done, all the loss, the destroyed towns, the money lost, it's not worth it to just go back to the status quo. The object on either side doth not justify the means, for the lives of men are too vile to be cast away with such trifles. It is the violence which is done and threatened to our persons, the destruction of our property by armed force, the invasion of our country by fire and sword, which is consciously qualifies to the use of arms, and the instant which such mode of defense become necessary. All subjugation to the British ought to have ceased, and the independence of America should have been considered as dating its era from and published by the first musket that was fired against her. This line is a line of consistency, neither drawn by caprice or extended by ambition, but produced by a chain of events by which the colonies were not the authors. All right. He's like, yeah, again, he's still talking about to his, to these kind of like wishy-washy fence sitters. Like, the muskets have fired. Like, it's happening. Like, stop being a wishy-washy little bitch. I found the argument is talking about how profit as a feedback system. Yeah, that is the incentive of capitalist firms. Historically, they are more efficient. But if one could make an argument of efficiency not, being the only point. I shall conclude these remarks with a following timely and well-intended hints. We ought to reflect that there are 3 different ways by which independency may hereafter be effected, and that one of the 3 will one day or another be the fate of America, vis-a-vis by the legal voice of the people in Congress, by military power, or by the mob. All right. So I'm guessing he's going to say we can have a Congress, we can have a junta, or it can be ruled by the mob. It may not always happen that our soldiers are citizens, and that the multitude a body of reasonable men. Virtue, as I have already remarked, it is not hereditary, neither is it perpetual. Should an independency be brought about by the first of those means, we have every opportunity and every encouragement before us to form the noblest, purest constitution on the face of the earth. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. A situation similar to the present hath not happened since the days of Noah until now. The birthday of a new world is at hand, and the race of men, perhaps as numerous as all Europe contains, there are to receive their portion of freedom from the events of a few months. The reflection is awful, and in this point of view, how trifling, how ridiculous do the paltry little cavilings of a few weak or interested men appear when weighted against the business of the world. This is kind of he's like, all right, we got a big chance here to do something great. We should get this Constitution and Congress going before something sucks into this power vacuum that we are creating here. Oh man, how many more pages do I got? It's getting late. All right, almost done. Should we neglect the present favorable and inviting period, and independence be hereafter affected by other means, we must charge these consequences to ourselves, or those other rather narrow and prejudiced souls are inhabited, usually opposing the measure. He's always good with the burns. I think that everything should be more efficient if we focus on advancement instead of money. Yeah, I'm Central Time too. Oh, I just wanted to finish this tonight. It's taking me like 3 nights to read this like 95 pages because I keep getting... I haven't been feeling good. I don't know what I should read next. Maybe I should just do some actual Twitch thing and play some games next few days. All right. There are reasons to be given in support of independence which men should rather privately think of than be publicly... It's cut off there. I guess told of. We ought not now to be doubting whether we shall be independent or not, but anxious to accomplish it on a firm, secure, and honorable basis, and uneasy rather than it is not to begin upon. All right, so he's kind of winding down here. Every day convinces us of its necessity. Even the Tories, if such beings yet remain among us, should he always has a good he always gets a good jab in. Should of all men be the most solicitous to promote it, for as the appointment of committees at first protected them from popular rage, so a wise and well-established form of government will be the only certain means of continuing it securely to them. Wherefore, if they have not virtue enough to be Whigs, they ought to have prudence enough to wish for independence. So he's saying, even these Tories, these kind of sort of loyal to England people. If we don't win, it's gonna be mob rule or military rule. So you might as well jump on board. In short, independent is not. This is kind of the first time I think he's ever made any kind of overture to the loyalist side at all. It's usually trying to convince the middle or rile up kind of already the independence people. In short, independence is the only bond that ties us and keeps us together. We shall see then that our object and our ears shall be legally shut against the schemes of intriguing as well as cruel enemy. We shall then too be on a proper footing to treat with Britain, for there is reason to conclude that the pride of that court will be less hurt by treating with the American states for terms of peace than with those whom she denominates rebellious subjects. Ooh. Sorry, it's going back to that part, going to foreign courts, hey, oh, It is our it is our delaying in that encourages her to hope for conquest, and that our backwardness tends only to prolong the war, as we have without any good effect therefrom, without our trade to obtain to redress our grievances. Let us now try the alternative, by independently redressing them ourselves, and then offering to open the trade. The mercantile and reasonable part of England will be still with us, because peace with trade is preferable to war without it. And if this offer is not to be accepted, other courts might be applied to. So this is actually a plea to England, like, hey, when peace, things will go back to the trade will be good, and if you don't want it in England, we'll give it to the French and the Spanish. We'll give that trade to them instead. On these grounds I rest the matter, and as no offer hath yet been made to refute the doctrine contained in the former editions of this pamphlet, it is a negative proof that either the doctrine cannot be refuted, or that the party in favor of it are too numerous to be opposed. Wherefore, instead of gazing at each other with suspicion or doubtful curiosity, lest each of us hold out to his neighbor the hearty hand of friendship, and unite in drawing a line which, like the act of oblivion, shall bury in forgetfulness every formal dissension. Let us the names of Whigs and Tory be extinct, and let us none other be heard among us than those of a good citizen, an open and resolute friend, a virtuous supporter of the rights of mankind, and a free and independent states of America. All right. But I think the main and biggest downfall to socialism is just how it's going to be applied. Especially communism, because communism is stateless, but in order for resources to be distributed, you have to have a state. Socialism is hard to apply because nobody likes having their rights violated. Those are some good points. I just don't see any stateless society in humanity's future. I don't think a power vacuum can be that large without something or someone will fill it, or at least really try to, or really attempt to. Maybe I'm just I don't know, too skeptical, but maybe. Socialism is hard to apply because nobody likes having their rights violated. I think the main problem with socialism is that there's no coherent definition. You ask 3 socialists what socialism is, you get 3 different answers. Like, dictionarily, it'll be, workers owning the right of production. Okay. And if you try to, argue against that or try to bring it down, yeah. Socialism means basically whatever who you're talking to wants it to mean. That's why I'll argue about socialism, but I usually won't unless someone gives me what they mean by that. Because it's like, oh, you want workers to own a position? Like, no, I just want, free healthcare, and I want the government to do this. I'm like, well, that's not really anything socialist about the government doing something. Doesn't make it socialist. It just means the government is doing something. That's welfare capitalism. But it's like, okay. Do you mean by that, or do you mean worker-owned, or do you mean I want a preliminary socialist or communist state? That's okay, that means a totally new thing as well. But yeah, so it's when somebody says I want socialism. It's like, okay, what do you mean? You're gonna have to be more specific. So I don't know. The term in itself I find kind of. Sure, but I don't know if people really want either. I think if you like explain what either of those things meant, I don't think most people would want either. They might. Actually, they might. I don't know if everybody wants to be their own. No, I understand the differences, but I don't think people want private property abolished either. You go tell people like, all right, you can't start your own business. You have to, you and all your coworkers have to own it. It's like, I don't think they people would like that anymore. Even if they would never open a business. I don't know if most people like that. I don't think a lot of. I think the biggest thing is also I don't think a lot of people want to own their business or want to own a business or be a part of a co-op. They're like, I want to get my paycheck and I want to go home and I want to watch football and I want to see my wife and my kids. I don't want to go to like meetings talking about like what we're going to do next quarter. I know feelings kind of play into this, but yeah, I understand. But there's no. I think I'm not trying to put this. I don't think you're going to solve greed with a systematic change. You can try to direct it, but all right, let's say you own you're part of a co-op. You're all making, $1,000, and you're like, all right, y'all gonna do a vote of like, are we gonna bring in 2 new employees? Both these guys don't have a job, and you're like, I'm not gonna lose, I'm not gonna cut my pay so we can start paying these guys. It's like even though like even if it is in your interest to help grow the company, you might not do it. So it's like personal. You might have there could be greed in a socialist system just as easily. And it's like those 2 guys now, they don't have a job because nobody wants to hire them because they don't want to cut the worker owners don't want to cut their own pay to hire 2 new employees, even though in the long run they might be better off. So it's not that's why I try to say like trying to moralize your economic system is trying to find morals in your economic system is going to be really hard just because of human nature. You might some things might be better, but other things might be worse. And it's like okay, or this is the same situation. Do we vote? Do we vote to? We've gotten some extra money. We've been running our business. Do we vote to expand our business or like buy a new supplier or do some advertisements, or we can all give ourselves a $10 raise, and everyone's like $10 raise, fuck it. It's like the overall economy might be better. Those workers that voted to give themselves a raise might be better off. It was a greedy situation, but the overall economy might be worse because of it. They could have like spent that money on expanding their business instead of giving themselves a raise. So that's also greed in a socialist system. So that's why I'm like saying like you could try. I think what also kind of makes socialism a bit hard to think of is the fact that capitalism has been around a lot longer, and the fact that capitalism apply more. Yeah, but we have socialist firms under capitalism. There are like worker cooperatives and like things like this, which are running as socialist firms, and they run into just as many pitfalls as any capitalist firm. So that's why I'm like I don't really care about like advocating for socialism because a socialist firm can exist under a capitalist system. So I'm totally fine with having both. If I think people shouldn't be worried about like changing the system, like if there's something they like, I think they should advocate for more firms to become more socialist like, or advocating for support of like maybe like advocating for government, like hey, I want more investment in worker owned firms. I want to like try this out. It's like I think that's a totally great thing and things people should do. But I'm not really worried about like changing the whole system because I think it's just you're just trading one thing for another. You're not gaining anything. You're playing a card game. You're switching around. You're hiding the ball into the cups. Oh. Oh man. Well, I am done with common sense though. I don't know, but if you want to, yeah, like I said, if you want to advocate for socialism, I would do it. Do some groundwork. Don't we're like, oh, we're gonna have some magical revolution, or the government's gonna come in and change. Start a worker co-op. Get a bunch of workers together and buy a McDonald's, and then show people like, hey, this works. But yeah, that's why I have a lot of the problems. That's why I don't give the reason I don't give it much regard is because all the advocates that I see online anyway that advocate for socialism, they're just LARPing. They're having a good time. They're pretending. They're playing pretend. They do no actual work or advocation for any of their beliefs. So I'm like, all right, I don't need to pay attention to you. You'll do nothing to continue your own goals. So I don't even believe people actually believe it. So it's like I'm like, all right, you want to be a contrarian, or you want to have your thing, but not if you're not doing anything to move towards it, then I'm not worried about it. Yeah, I don't know. All right. Well, it's a Faguzzi. I think that I am done though. It's 4:30 in the morning. Hey, I just noticed you followed. Thanks, I really appreciate that. I don't know if I'll be on tomorrow night, but I'm usually on 5 nights a week after I get off work. Um, no, maybe I'll just actually read the actual Constitution next. Or maybe I'll just play some Civ or something. I think I might need a break from just reading stuff on stream. But yeah, I know that you just followed, so I just I do this for my own fun. Um, I get off late at work now, and so like I have just time to kill, and I don't want to just like watch movies or play video games. So I figured I'd be interacting with some people. But anyway, I hope you have a really good night. You have to be active with it. Yeah. All right. Well, it's nice talking to you, man. Hopefully you'll jump in again next time I'm on, which will probably be in the night, tomorrow night or the night after. You have a good one, man. Oh.